It's the Line Podcast, everybody's favorite topic, the Notwithstanding clause. We are going to ask the U.S. ambassador to stop it, very politely, of course, and then why we think Carney is starting to screw up and pretty fast. Stick around. This episode of the Line Podcast is brought to you by Universities Canada. From cancer treatments and clean water technologies to quantum computing and AI, university research is driving discoveries that change lives. These breakthroughs start in Canadian university labs, but their impact is felt in every community. Universities carry out nearly 40% of Canada's research and development, generating more than $55 billion in economic impact every year. Every dollar invested returns benefits for Canadians, new treatments, new industries, and thriving communities. But research requires sustained federal support. Without it, Canada risks losing talent and ideas abroad. To learn more, visit Univcan.ca. Want me to confess something, Jen?
Yes, always.
I hate talking about the Constitution.
Oh, why? We've got a good one today. It's good.
I know we do. I think I hate talking about the Constitution for the same reason I never watched Game of Thrones. Everybody else was doing it, and I don't do that. Like, I have this weird oppositional defiant thing I haven't really dealt with as a person yet. Canadian columnists love talking about the Notwithstanding clause. I hate talking about the Notwithstanding clause.
All right. Well,
but here it is. It actually is one of the most important issues in the country right now.
It's absolutely the most important story in the country right now. It's also, I think, and I'm going to make the case, Carney's first major fuck up as prime minister.
Later in the podcast, I'm going to add a few other contenders, but you make the case first.
Sure. Okay. So let's start by explaining what Section 33 is. So for those people who maybe aren't completely invested in the latest news about the Canadian Constitution, and I know there may be some of you out there, it'll be rare, but there will be a few. Section 33 is basically the clause that allows the provinces and the federal government to overrule judicial decisions that fall under certain categories. So Section 33 was something that was put in place back in the 80s when the Constitution was repatriated. And it was put in there as a clause to sort of assert parliamentary supremacy, to basically say, no, it's ultimately at the end of the day, it's, we have these sorts of agreed upon fundamental rights of Canadians, but it's still parliaments at both the provincial and the federal level who decide the laws. That's because we live in a representative democracy, and that's how that works. So the charter is going to give the Supreme Court of Canada in particular kind of wider latitude to interpret whether or not those laws are in or out of bounds of the charter and the sorry, I'm struggling here. In and out of bounds of the charter, but we're still going. Because it's hard. There we go. It's complicated. But Section 33 was a kind of meant to be a last-ditch stopgap to make sure that it was, in fact, the elected parliament that ultimately decided whether or not they could move forward with those rules. And
if the parliament and the courts ever fundamentally disagree on an issue, parliamentary supremacy is assured by Section 33.
By Section 33. And this was one of the caveats that was really necessary to put in to get a lot of provinces to sign on. Yep. Quebec, of course, rather famously never fully signed on, and yet Quebec has been one of the most heavy-handed users of Section 33 over the last several decades. So this is always kind of contentious when provinces decide, we disagree with the judicial ruling and we are going to invoke Section 33 and move forward with our position anyway. There are some limitations on Section 33, like a parliament can only invoke it for a period of 5 years and then has to review it if they want to continue with it. However, it
doesn't apply to the entire Constitution.
It does not apply to
certain sections.
Yeah, it's limited to certain sections. So rulings that are decided based on certain sections can have this kind of stopgap applied against it. So look, it wasn't put in there frivolously. It's there for a reason. What's absolutely true is that provinces in particular are using it with increasing frequency in recent years. And I think that is happening in tandem with the fact that the courts are over time broadening the scope of what they are willing to rule on. And, there are lots of legal scholars who could provide much more detailed explanation about that than I can or will at present, because I'm speaking very generally to a general audience.
Thank you.
We had a great column about this by Brian Jikma in the Line on Friday. He talked about how he's lost trust in the courts, and the reasons and the particular rulings that has led him to lose trust in the courts. His argument is that the courts are increasingly moving away from the precedents that they themselves have set, and they are taking on increasingly political understandings of their roles and the depth of their jurisdiction. The Supreme Court is less and less willing to say, you know what, that's for Parliament to decide. Mm-hmm. We're going to step back on that. Like, they're less and less willing to do that. Instead, they're taking on a kind of what's called the living tree interpretation of the Constitution. And they're saying, no. Our understanding of the Constitution has to evolve, not with just what's in the plain text, but increasingly in line with what's happening with culture writ large. And they've used that interpretation to, move more and more into taking on the role of legislators, frankly. And there are many people who are parliamentary supremacists and who fundamentally believe that democracies rely on, having the people we elect make the rules for us.
It's
a radical thought.
It's the last socially acceptable kind of supremacism.
There you go.
Yeah.
The whole believing that we live in a democracy thing. Who take issues with it. I mean, and the example of this that consistently comes to mind and that I would like to remind people of is that, the Supreme Court was one vote short of declaring bad jokes illegal in this province. That's not a joke. That's not even an exaggeration. They recently decided with a very narrow margin a couple years ago that an offensive joke about a disabled boy came close to being illegal in Canada. They ultimately decided against that ruling, but only by one vote. But they narrowly decided against that ruling, but only one vote. There was no point at which the Supreme Court stepped back and said, maybe we shouldn't be making the rules about what kinds of jokes are legal or illegal in this country. Like, there was no part of that. No, they took that ruling right to the edge. So that's kind of the underlying rationale for a lot of this stuff. And in the midst of the courts taking on a greater and greater role, you've had parliaments be much more willing to say, nah, we're Section 33ing this. And in the midst of that movement, and many sort of, especially what I would call elite Canadians, engaging in a lot of Sturm und Drang when provinces do this. We'll get into that in a minute. But in the midst of all of this, you have this week Sean Fraser basically filing a factum with the Supreme Court, trying to essentially
Oh no, he did. No, sorry. I'm shaking my head. Jen thought I was just shaking my head because she's wrong. I'm shaking my head because she said Sean Fraser.
Oh, fair enough. Well, that's a totally different set of problems.
We'll get to that in a minute.
So he puts forward this factum with the Supreme Court that's essentially asking them to try and find a way to limit the use of the provincial use of the Notwithstanding clause. He as a parliamentarian is trying to argue that the Supreme Court should really have more power over him, essentially, with this kind of argument. And people like Doug Ford have come out just absolutely guns ablazing, saying that is completely wrong.
It's weird for Doug.
He got quite aggressive. And Doug's actually been quite aligned with Carney on a lot of different issues as well. Yeah. So he's like, no, this is a massive mistake. It's a terrible choice. This is an absolute fuck up by Mark Carney. And also, by the way, if you guys even try something like that between Quebec and Ontario, we have the constitutional authority to overrule it. And we will. So this is a waste of time that's going nowhere. I actually think that there's a pretty good chance that if they try to move forward on this, we could be staring down the barrels of a serious constitutional crisis, in which, the limits of courts and the limits of parliaments, more crucially, will be very irrevocably decided.
Which would force me to talk about the Constitution. So let's hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, like it's actually going to become a very serious issue if this is what Carney's choosing to spend his political capital on, and to the extent that I actually think it could totally derail any other agenda that he has. So politically, this is a very stupid thing for him to do. Yep. I think that there's some rationales that are going into why he's making this particular decision, and we can get into that. But Matt, what have I missed? What have I failed to explain appropriately here?
No, I mean, God help us. I think you explained this.
Yes.
Like you did what had to be done on explaining the Notwithstanding clause.
Okay. Because I can't assume that everyone's going to understand why this is important.
No, a few other bits of like historical context I would add. This was a few years ago now, and it was stupid. But like Doug Ford said he'd use the notwithstanding clause to like reduce the size of the Toronto City Council.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happened, like I think who was it? Was it Paul Wells who was joking about this recently? He said if you read through like any news story about the notwithstanding clause, you will almost inevitably see nuclear option used because like that's how like everybody describes it. And I remember at the time, even myself thinking, why is Doug using nukes to cut the size of Toronto City Council? That's dumb. But I think now with hindsight, what we are actually seeing, and Jen, you've said this, is provincial parliaments are just increasingly willing to either use or threaten to use it. And I understand why. I think Brian's piece in the line on Friday gets into this and explains it well. He talked about the Rodriguez decision, the one on assisted dying, euthanasia, and how like I'm old enough to remember the Rodriguez decision. And then I'm certainly old enough to remember the Maid decision. And I think Brian and I would disagree on this. I actually like the second decision more, but I don't know why the court changed their mind. And I worry about this too. Even though I happen to prefer the second outcome, I also like living in a country with judicial predictability. That is a good thing.
Well, and I would also add judicial restraint. You need to have, in order for the courts to maintain the levels of trust that it does, that needs to consistently demonstrate judicial restraint. You need to be dealing with a court that's willing to say, that's actually not our job. Is that
we have a legislature for that.
Yeah, we have a legislature to decide on that.
That's for.
Yeah, and you can't lawfare the shit out of every political decision you don't like by taking it to court. And that's what's increasingly happening, right? It's legislation and governance by lawfare.
I want you in a minute to tell me about why you think Carney's doing this, but there's the other side of that coin. You said you had asked what had you missed. I don't think you missed anything in explaining the charter and the notwithstanding clause, but I think it is worth noting. I understand why the court started to do this, right? Because one of the things we found after the abortion ruling, like way back, like almost 40 years ago, or maybe more than 40 years ago
88.
now. Okay, it was 88. Okay, so almost 40 years ago, was that provincial and federal legislators and then collectively legislatures began to realize this is radioactive. We don't want to touch it. We'll ignore it long enough and the court will do it. And sort of institutionalized Canadian political cowardice began causing problems that I don't know if it was proper for the courts to step in, but I understand, like societally, I understand why that happened. And this feeds back into so much that you and I have talked about
But wait a minute, but the courts didn't step in that case. We actually have an absence of abortion law because the court sent it back to Parliament, which was actually appropriate. And
but
Parliament
since then, yes,
Parliament
the parliamentarians
tried to reattach it, reapproach the abortion situation and try to create legislation around it, decided it was politically untouchable. And as a result, we basically have now a state of non-law around abortion. And that vacuum of legislation has been filled by essentially the Canadian Medical Association.
Medical regulation.
Medical regulation that have put forward particular. And there are lots of people who are happy with that compromise.
It seems to work, more or less.
It seems to work.
But I mean, since then, though, parliamentarians have sent references to the court. They've ignored things until the court has interfered. I'm with you. I like parliamentary supremacy. I just wish our parliamentarians, I'm going to revive a term from Line Pockets about a year ago. I just wish they weren't gormless weasels because they should be courageously taking on the issues of the day. They don't.
Well, and so here's also where I play devil's advocate against my own argument and like my own argument suggesting that the Supreme Court is not appropriately restrained. It does not restrain itself appropriately. Part of the reason why that has happened is because Parliament isn't taking itself seriously anymore, right? I mean, you only have to sit on through a couple of committees at the House before you realize these people aren't actually taking government seriously anymore. Yeah, these people have
45 seconds of one question period.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. These people are increasingly treating the processes of Parliament as merely theater by which to engage in their own particular partisan bullshit. And Parliament is not functioning the way it needs to be in order to provide the best governance to Canadians and hasn't been for a very, very long time. Let's not waste our time pointing fingers. Let's just say everyone has decided to treat this like a game. And where Parliament chooses to not take itself seriously, again, power fills a void. Which institutions still maintain high degrees of credibility, high degrees of trust, and are willing to step into the void to be the adults where the politicians have chosen not to be? Well, the Supreme Court. Like Parliament has allowed this to happen. The fact that you have literally Sean Fraser sending a factum to the court saying, create limitations on my own power.
Yeah.
It's like supremely indicative of the problem.
I'm gonna tell you about Sean Fraser in a second, but I'm gonna make a really depressing comment first, and I know that's what the Line Podcast listeners are here for. Mm-hmm. Taking a holistic view of, I sound like a bureaucrat when I say that, taking like an all-in, top-down view of Canadian governance in 2025, increasingly to me reads like reading about the timeline of a disaster in the official inquiry that is eventually produced about it. I think we're at the stage where you're like, the failure of load-bearing strut L7 transferred unsustainable forces to struts L8, 9, and 10, causing rapid disassembly of so the courts are trying to compensate, rightly or wrongly, for legislative failures. The legislators are now trying to compensate for that. The provinces are trying to fight off the feds. The feds are trying to deal with the provinces. I want everyone to know we are at the part of the accident reconstruction timeline where some engineer is about to write, it was at this point that the forces became non-recoverable. And it worries me. And the thing I would add about Sean Fraser, God bless him, Sean Fraser has made like one good decision in the last couple of years, and that was spending more time with his family, and he didn't stick with it. And as you know, I try to be gentlemanly and not allow personal feelings in this. I don't really have any personal feelings about Sean Fraser, but I have read recent Canadian public opinion on immigration. And our immigration consensus has been absolutely fucking destroyed by the gross incompetence of the Trudeau-era immigration minister, who is now the Attorney General and Justice Minister who is trying to fuck with the Constitution. So fresh off his success, taking a multi-generational run at building a Canadian success story that was the envy of the world and flushing it down the shitter, he is now deciding to revamp federalism and the Constitution in Canada. Now, thank you for your attention to this matter.
All right. Now, do I want to get into the deep philosophical thing of what I think is going on here?
Sure.
Okay. I've got a theory, and I've mentioned this theory in passing before, but poke holes in it here. And that is Mark Carney, Sean Fraser, a lot of these guys are in a kind of political and intellectual milieu that regards Section 33 as a kind of untouchable sort of how should I say this? A lever you can pull that you've nonetheless surrounded in barbed wire and put like a giant red button in the middle of.
Well, here we go again. It's the nuclear option.
It's the nuclear option. It's blah, 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 blah. It's there, but you can never use it. It's some kind of abrogation of Canadian democracy in order for the democratically elected leaders to decide on the laws. And there's a general sense that this is almost like a holy taboo thing that has to be adhered to, because a lot of these guys fundamentally are. It's kind of the Andrew Coyne problem. I'm going to tease Andrew Coyne a little bit about this. There's a sense of odeur around the use of this particular legal tool, right? And this is coming from a culture of highly legal people. We know that the Liberal Party tends to be where all of the lawyers in this country live. It tends to live in a place of fairly unquestioned faith in the Supreme Court. The idea that the Supreme Court is above mere politics, right? How do I say this nicely? These people don't believe in democracy. They're technocrats. This is the problem with all of these arguments. These people are a part of an intellectual collection that, and I think Mark Carney is very much involved in this collection, that fundamentally believes that that politics is dirty and politicians are, kind of stupid. And we engage in that like political theater over there, but the real decisions get made in back doors by people who know better. And That's not democracy, friends. That's technocracy. You're actually technocrats. There's a lot of people who I would consider that who are in what I would call the elite of Canadian society. And like Matt, I think you and I have to be honest about the fact that we have a perch there too.
We're talking on our podcast.
We're talking on our podcast. But they'll play lip service to the idea of democracy, but they don't really want people to be making their own decisions. What they really want is, the people who know best to be making their own decisions. Shit like this becomes endemic and bubbles right up to the surface around times like COVID. Mm-hmm. The idea that no, the public health experts know best and your job is to sit down and blah, 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 blah. And, as
You're
long
seeing
as
it now,
everything
Jen, with crime stats. Like every time some guy gets butchered on his front lawn, there's someone who wants to show up and go, look, violent assaults are down 3.2% in that census metropolitan area.
You just sit down. We know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And, I think that the tolerance for that technocratic impulse in Canada is pretty high. We're a pretty complacent country. We're a pretty easygoing country. And we're a pretty lazy country. And as long as things are more or less going well, generally speaking, I think most people are fine to allow that technocracy to function and allow, they put a pretty high trust in the institutions. When things cease to go well, that technocratic impulse, that mother knows best impulse, enrages people.
Yeah.
Absolutely burn it the fuck down, crash the gates, occupy the capital level enraged. Like it's a tonal thing and it's a mentality thing, and people hear it and they understand it. They understand what they're being told by this, and they just lose it. And right now, I hate to break it to you, but
it's the fuck you and the horse you rode in on
fuck
response.
you and the horse you rode in on.
Yeah.
This is a democracy. The people we elect get to make the rules, and if we don't like the rules they make, we elect someone else. That's how this works. And I think that the crowd of people who think that there's something wrong with using Section 33 are overwhelmingly coming from that technocratic elite that are highly disconnected from that current of rage, and are also highly disconnected with the reality of how well the country is really working or not working. And Sean Fraser, you were jumping on it. You were jumping right on it. The other thing that I would just look, reality test that. Does that feel right?
What this feels like is a scene in a movie where they have successfully foreshadowed what the disaster is going to be to the audience, but the characters have remained oblivious. Mm-hmm. And this is going to sound kind of obscure. It's a very Matt reference. But in one of the Terminator movies, a Terminator from the future comes back and goes to a military base and puts a bunch of advanced evil Terminator code into the robots on the base. And then the robots go nuts and start killing everybody. And I started to think to myself, why would you have a military base full of armed robots just sitting on a shelf? It's the part of the movie where you're shadowing, hey, look at these things. These are all going to be used against you later. I don't know if Sean Fraser realizes he has walked into the warehouse full of armed robots. And the audience gets it. You and I are doing the horror movie thing. Don't go in that room.
Don't go into the room.
Don't build a bunch of armed robots and then just leave them in the warehouse.
Just fix bail reform, Sean.
Yeah, exactly.
Just fix bail reform and leave it alone.
So right now, 41 million Canadians are looking at Sean Fraser and going, this government is proud to announce that we have built 100 heavily armed robots that we will now leave in a warehouse unattended. And then a reporter puts up their hand and go, Mr. Fraser, why do we have 100 armored robots? Well, we don't know, but the plot requires that to be a thing later. There is no reason for the federal government to be picking this fight right now. And in fact, there are a series of reasons they should not be picking this fight right now. And I want someone to ask Minister Fraser, why do we have a warehouse full of armed and armored robots? This is the plot point where the audience is figuring it out faster than the characters. And all you need is one character in there to be like, maybe we shouldn't be building armed robots and then just putting them in the warehouse.
And that character happens to be Doug Ford of all people. My God. The other thing that I would just also say is that, again, there's a kind of an unspoken belief among the technocratic elite in this country. And I know, I'm sorry, I'm using words like technocratic elite. I apologize right off the bat.
I'm trying to humanize it with deadly robots.
I know. But like, it was the same sort of idea when you had like all of the economists sign the open letter supporting the carbon tax because the tax people were wrong.
Yeah.
And I kind of made this point is like, you guys seem to be operating in this space where you believe that policy is this pure, beautiful thing that doesn't taint you, and politics is the darkness. And we don't let ourselves be tainted by the evils of politics. That kind of mentality is just endemic among this class. Without, a lot of these guys don't seem to understand that politics and policy are the same thing. I mean, they're inextricable. They're the same. If you want to forward a policy, you need to engage in politics. That's just what it is. You need to engage in communication theory. You need to engage in this stuff. You need to live in the dirt in which you want to influence.
And first, I think that there's do no harm should be the advice for all of them.
Well, right. And I think a lot of these guys also fundamentally believe that there's something morally superior about the Supreme Court because it's not political.
Mm-hmm.
Well, isn't it? Firstly, and secondly, we're gonna quietly shift a lot of the decision making to the morally pure paragons of non-political governance that exists in the Supreme Court, because the people, the actual Democrat people, the elected people, can't be trusted really with it. And there's just kind of this unstated vibe to that. And the problem that I have with that is that I want to scream at these people and be like, "You're fucking idiots," because if you put the actual levers of power in the quote non-political Supreme Court, guess what? You've just made the Supreme Court political, because now everybody understands that in order to have the type of governance that they want, they don't need to just get elected. They need to get elected and they need to stack the courts. And that's what they'll do. And by the way, conservatives have figured this out. And if you want proof of that, go look at what's happened in the United States. 30 years ago, conservatives in the United States figured out that more and more power was getting effectively sapped out of the House and the Senate and being placed in the Supreme Court, and that the Supreme Court had more influence over sort of cultural norms and legal norms in the society. And so what did they do? They engaged in a generational project, a 30-year project to cultivate conservative legal scholars and voices and to stack the court with them.
Yep.
That's what they did. And this is where it's ended. A highly politicized Supreme Court in which the norms and institutional boundaries that once existed have been fundamentally eroded. And by the way, if you think the conservatives in Canada haven't figured that out, you're a fucking idiot.
You and I spoke a couple of years ago about how Alberta politics for a long, long time. This was around the time of when Rachel Notley had formed government or was exiting government. I don't remember which one of the things it was. But you had raised the point that for many, many, many generations, politically savvy people still existed in Alberta, politically motivated people. There were political battles in Alberta. There were factional fights. But instead of being between parties, it was all
within
inside.
Parties. It was nomination battles.
Yes.
It was quiet internal knife fights. That's where it went. Politics never went away in Alberta. It just changed.
We don't want to push all of that to the courts, but we're doing it because Sean Fraser has decided to invest another $100 million in putting 50 more armored robots in a warehouse.
Well, and look, there's blame to go around here. I don't just blame Sean Fraser here. Sean Fraser is the natural apotheosis of an entire mentality that hasn't been challenged, right? Within a certain class of people. Like what I would call the Andrew Coyne Canadians, right? But like, look, if you want to veer the spaceship head first into a constitutional crisis, instead of, I don't know, just fixing bail reform, maybe addressing some of the, lack of prison spaces. Like maybe we should just focus on that before we head. Nope. Nah. Anyway.
No, we're just going to keep putting robots into warehouses, and then we'll be really surprised one day when they kill us.
It's fine. Anyway. I got nothing more to say about this. I think it's a story we need to be paying attention to, or it's a story that will go away. We're going to talk about why I think this is actually Carney's big first major fuck up.
Yeah.
But we're going to save that for the third section, because first I think we're going to talk about Pete Hoekstra, who's once again talking in public, which is always a choice when the U.S. ambassador chooses to do that in Canada.
Like and subscribe. For hundreds of communities across Canada, forestry is a lifeline, supporting 200,000 workers, $87 billion in annual revenues, and $37 billion in exports, $29 billion to the United States. But it's more than just a driver of our economy. It's key to addressing some of our biggest challenges. We need an action plan for our forest sector and its employees, one that will help build the homes we need with Canadian wood, reduce the risk of wildfires, and create more family-supporting jobs right here at home. To learn more about what forestry can do for Canada, visit forestryforthefuture.ca.
Matt, Canada's favorite American has decided to speak in public again. Would you like to explain to the, because I did some heavy lifting trying my damnedest to try and explain Section 33. So I think you need to take the lead on this one. Try and explain to us who Pete Hoekstra is and what he's done now.
Well, I mean, Pete Hoekstra is the United States ambassador to Canada. Like, explaining who he is in that sense is really, really easy. Important context. I think most people understand this. Ambassadors tend to come from two different groups. There are the lifelong career diplomats who have a career progression that goes from like junior staffer to consular official somewhere. And then if you're good, you get an ambassadorship. There's also the political appointments where governments either put trusted allies into places where they want them, or they make problems go away. Referring to last week's podcast and how Mark Carney is making a bunch of problems go away by sending them off to diplomatic postings. Pete Hoekstra is, as far as I can tell, not a problem for Donald Trump, but he is someone very much of Trump's worldview. He is not a legacy Republican guy, although he did have a political career a while ago. He's also not a career diplomat. He's a MAGA guy that Trump tapped because he's a MAGA guy and sent him to Canada. We've talked about Hoekstra before because
in the context of Fuck You America, the segment that we introduced.
The Fuck You America segment.
Right.
I actually think he's incredibly valuable, and I'm glad he's here because I was in a room where he was giving a speech and I was barely paying attention to him. I was listening to what he was saying, but I wasn't looking at him. I was looking around at the room. And I was looking at Canadians either getting it for the first time or maybe processing it for the first time. And that's not exactly the same thing. But Hoekstra,
there's a good, healthy sense of a sinking feeling that comes across a room silently. That I'm not sure Hoekstra is capable of reading because he's an American, but as a fellow Canadian, we feel it.
Or counterpoint, he just don't give a shit. So I was in a room.
I think he absolutely gives a shit.
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But
he absolutely gives a shit.
So
he doesn't understand why people are responding the way that they do.
When he gave his remarks in the speech I was in, it was a big crowd, 1,000, 1,500 people. I have never heard one of these events be so silent. And that's something that really stuck with me after. And I told you right after, I was texting Jen. These events happen. There's polite applause. There's laugh lines. There's interesting or chortle or even no, that's not true. This room was silent. And one of the things that Hoekstra has done more than once is commented basically that he's disappointed that Canadians don't like America anymore or don't like him. Like he's saying, well, he's just saying things like, well, I've been really disappointed to see a lack of enthusiasm among Canadians, or, it's been really disappointing to me to kind of be traveling this country and seeing kind of like some hostility or
coldness.
And it's so the latest thing that has caused us to bring this up again is that he was at what the hell was he at? He was at some
business council, whatever thing.
Yeah, and he was talking with Colin Robertson, who I know a little bit, long-term Canadian diplomat, smart guy. And one of the things that Hoekstra brought up was airport pre-clearance. So Jen had to struggle in the first segment to explain the Constitution. I got the easier job here. Most large Canadian airports have detachments of U.S. Customs personnel. You clear your U.S. Customs check at your Canadian departure point. When you arrive in the United States, you're considered a domestic flight. it's just very efficient that way. You step off the plane in Florida or New York or Boston, and you walk out like you're an American. You don't have to show your passport again. Unprompted, Hextra brought up the possibility of ending that.
Oh, and why? And why?
Well, okay. See, this is where it gets interesting. He described it in the context of vastly decreased U.S. flights to the United States, down about 25%. And he's describing it as a business decision. Well, we operate these pre-clearance points in your airports at our expense, and business is down. And I'm not quoting him directly, but what he said was something like, any good businessman has to reevaluate costs when there's a decline. And okay, fair enough.
Nice pre-clearance you got there. Shame if the business didn't come back.
Yeah. And this is the real message. And Jen and I have talked about this before. We have mused a bit about pressure points that the Americans are going to start putting to us, either ahead of the trade negotiations or even just on general principles. An obvious pain point, and Jen and I had talked about this before, was visas, because Canadians can travel, I think, up to 180 days in the United States visa-free, which is huge for snowbirds. The Americans are right now introducing fees for visitors to the United States, hundreds of dollars, unless you're coming from a visa-exempt country. Canada, actually, no, not even that. Canadian citizens, permanent residents and visitors here are not exempt. So if you are an Indian national, I should have rephrased that. I don't know what countries are exempt. If you're from a non-exempt citizenship and you fly to New York from Toronto, you owe them a couple $100. They're charging you basically an entrance fee. Canadian citizens are currently exempt. That's something they could change. Canadians might need to start applying for a visa if you're going to be in the United States more than 7 days. And additional pressure point, wouldn't it be a shame if the State Department bureaucracy just, oh darned, we're falling behind. We haven't been able to process those Canadian visitor visas. That's a very obvious pain point they can use against us. Airport pre-clearance is a different one. And to see Hextra bring it up unprompted like that, Colin, to his credit, he jumped on that. He goes, that's a threat. And Hextra's like, no, it's just business. And he's like, no, that's
you're
a
threatening
threat.
us with that. Yeah. And also, these things, let's be clear, these things have been around since the Eisenhower era. Like, this is not
1952, I think, yeah.
This is not a new thing that America has chosen to do. The other thing that I would also point out as well is one of the beneficiaries of pre-clearance is actually American carriers, American aircraft carriers themselves. Because once we hit the pre-clearance in places like Calgary and Toronto, I think they're just in Calgary and Toronto, are they not?
No, there's a few others, but there's not a ton.
Okay. I think probably Vancouver as well. Basically, those airline carriers, which do code shares with things like Air Canada and WestJet, they can now fly in the domestic network, which means they don't have to fly into international terminals. They can use their own domestic terminals. It actually eases the logistics for the American flight carriers themselves to do this. So it's not just a special benefit for Canadians. It allows a lot of these American airlines as well to function as if Canada were within the American domestic network. So
also, it just helps the airports because there's thousands of passengers that aren't lined up waiting to go through the customs.
That's right.
Yeah, I know. We did this for like Eisenhower and probably who the hell was prime minister in 52? Saint Laurent, probably. They looked at opportunities to solve problems for both countries and to streamline a close relationship, and they took it. This is a completely logical thing that we should not be fucking with. I'm going to guess though that any hint that nice pre-clearance area you have there, it'd be a shame if anything happened to it. Do you have the feeling that's going to get Canadians lining up for that Arizona golf trip?
Well, I was just about to say, if we're going to have a very Machiavellian discussion about what his goal was with that, I would ask Mr. Hextra, what was your goal there? What were you trying to accomplish with that one precisely? Because do you really think Canadians are going to be like, oh no, shit, the U.S. ambassador's threatening me that if we don't book our vacation in Florida, he's going to get rid of pre-clearance for us. Like, no Canadian's going to be making their personal travel decisions based on that threat. Literally zero. Absolutely no Canadian is going to respond to that with anything other than, well, fuck you, buddy. And we'll say it with a smile. The decline in traffic to America is largely based in tourist traffic and tourist money. It's people who, business travel is still going there. I went to the United States a couple of weeks ago for business reasons. Business travel is still happening because, of course, it has to. But it's people who are choosing to take their discretionary income elsewhere as a direct result of what's happening in the United States. And also, do you want to know why people are increasingly nervous about going to the United States for discretionary reasons?
It's bullshit like this.
Well, it's bullshit like this, but it's also, I'm nervous about if I get some MAGA-hatted customs agent pull me aside, go through my phone, decide that I ain't Donald Trump enough, and decide to make an example of me. That's what people are nervous about. And I also think that we should put that is a 1 in 10,000 chance that a customs agent goes through your phone. But people like you and me, Matt, who are in the public eye, who criticize Donald Trump, for us, the odds are probably not 1 in 10,000. For us, the odds are probably a lot higher that we get pulled aside or their names get put on a database.
I have a phone now, a completely different phone with nothing on it, with an American cell phone number. And
exactly.
If I have to go to the U.S., I use it.
And do you want to know what also I'm not going to be super keen on doing if they get rid of customs preclearance?
Ever flying to the States.
And do you want to know why?
Because at least with preclearance, if anything goes wrong, you're on our soil.
There you go. So if I go through customs preclearance and a customs officer decides, Jen Gerson, that sounds familiar. Come aside, little miss, and let's talk about Charlie Kirk, which increasingly seems like it could happen. At least I can say at that point, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm staying home, and I can walk outside the line. And the odds that customs agent is going to be able to detain me for 2 weeks are pretty low. Maybe technically, but it'd be hard to do on Canadian soil. If you're making me go through customs preclearance on the other side, I'm a long way from home. So, nothing about this threat is going to encourage discretionary tourism travel to go up from Canada at all. If anything, it just incenses and makes the matters worse because you're highlighting the fact that America is threatening us. You're highlighting our interdependence and our vulnerability. And you're just being a fucking dick. Stop talking. Look, Americans and Canadians have very different communication styles. Americans are very direct and straightforward in what they say and think, and Canadians speak in absence. We speak in silence. If you're a Canadian and you're one of us and you know how to read a room, you know when people are pissed. But they'll never tell you. They'll smile to your face, but it's like this kind of a smile. As opposed to you know what I mean? It takes a degree of cultural enculturation to understand the communication styles. But being Canadian and watching how Americans communicate, we're very aware of the difference, but Americans aren't. So I'm not sure that Mr. Hoekstra understands just how much he's pissing people off because, Canadians are too polite to scream at his face.
Two things I'm going to add. First of all, and this is, look, I'm just one man, a part of one family unit. In recent years, sort of on an alternating year basis, we've taken trips to the southern United States over Christmas or March break. And we're planning on traveling this March, but we're looking at Mexico. And this is a 100% reaction to that we don't like this bullshit. The other thing, I raise it as a question and I don't pretend to have an answer. Something we should keep in mind.
Okay.
Is that Hoekstra's job is not necessarily entirely communicating to Canadians. I don't know how much, but one of the things that's, I think, a reality that we're already living with, and we see it when you hear cabinet meetings in the White House or you see MAGA senators or governors talking. A lot of what's coming out of their mouth is intended for consumption of their masters in DC. So when Hoekstra says stuff like this, his audience might not be us. It might be someone in DC going, "Oh, good boy. He said mean things. Good, good, good. We give him treat."
I don't know.
The
I
audience
don't think
he's two audiences, I guess.
Yeah, maybe, but I also don't think that the people down in DC are paying that much attention to us anyway. So I don't think this is a 4D. Yeah, I don't think this is 4D chess. I really don't. I think that this guy was selected because he's in alignment with the U.S. administration, and I think we should take him at face value.
I do, and I think it's incredibly the only thing I think maybe the only thing I disagree with what you've said is that he should stop talking. I want him live mic'd. I want him literally hot mic. And obviously we can build in privacy for like bathroom breaks and stuff. But I actually think it would be incredibly beneficial for Canadians to just have a hot mic on this guy all the time.
Well,
and have, like,
I don't know if
have
it
a
would be
YouTube channel
beneficial.
just live streaming it constantly.
I don't know how beneficial it would be for like the U.S.-Canada relations, but there you go. Speaking of U.S.-Canada relations, all of the people who have been calling us crazy and Trump deranged for the last several months get to be confronted by the indictment of James Comey, former FBI director.
Not all of them, but look, I will say this. I've noticed a change even in the last 2 weeks.
Interesting.
Jen and I, we've had our views of the U.S. administration. We've had our views of the trajectory of the United States. And I don't think, I think my views locked into place on election night. And absolutely nothing that has happened since has caused me to revise my assessment. The only revision I've made is things are maybe going a bit faster than I expected.
That's right. But this is a pretty quintessential, for those people who may be not up aware in the news, largely bogus indictment has been filed against James Comey, who is one of Trump's sort of long-term perceived enemies. This goes back to 2000 and
the first term, the investigation of, I think it was the Russia stuff in the first term where Comey was investigating.
Having skimmed through the indictment, I would say that the indictment appears to be totally baseless. This is really much a punishment is the process attempt. And also, I think worth noting is that the prosecutor who's actually filed the indictment is a woman named Lindsay Halligan. I'm quoting from Fortune here. The 36-year-old former Miss Colorado hopeful who only worked 3 federal cases before Trump promoted her to U.S. attorney. Because, of course, no actual U.S. attorney would have filed this claim against James Comey. So this is abusing the process in order to persecute political enemies, perceived or otherwise. And according to Trump himself, there's more coming.
You were down in the States when this happened, actually. Did you see the erroneous message to Pam Bondi?
Yes, the erroneous message to Pam Bondi, yeah.
So for if people have no idea what we're talking about, a week or two ago, Mr. Trump, what is Bondi? Attorney General? I'm trying to remember what her title is. Hang on, I'm going to do the quick Google here. This is awkward podcast. What's her formal title?
We're terrible people.
U.S. Attorney General. Okay, I wasn't sure if she's a special prosecutor or Attorney General. She's Attorney General. And on Truth Social, Donald Trump posted publicly a message that was written very much like a personal message that he accidentally put on Maine instead of sending privately to Bondi. And the message basically was, hey, look, I've been very patient, but people are starting to ask, where are the prosecutions of people like Comey? Come on, we got to go. Like, let's get it on here. We got to start laying some charges here. And then so people saw that message and went, what the fuck? The message disappeared off Trump's main feed very quickly. And then Bondi now we're seeing that this is proceeding here. I will say this. There are people, including members of our audience, who think we are Trump deranged lunatics who are hysterically overreacting to things, and will have chapter and verse ready to go explaining how the left is just as bad. This is not even a guess. This is my inbox for the last 10 months. What I will also say, though, is that a couple of weeks ago, and you'll remember this, I wrote a column where I asked for people's red lines. And people did send in some very, very thoughtful ones. And I've tucked them all in a file, and we're going to review them, you and I together, next year after Labor Day. I am going to tell you that I've heard from a few people who were skeptical 3 weeks ago who have had a viscerally negative reaction specifically to the Comey thing. And I just think that's interesting because everybody's different. We all here in our multitude of diversity. I'm always fascinated to see the things that would take someone who a month ago was like, Gurney, I think you're overreacting, but hey, exercise of good faith. This would freak me out. 3 weeks later, they're like, ooh, actually, maybe you were right. And I wish I had more of these. It's nice to feel vindicated. It's good for the ego. But I think the more interesting thing is not that it's happening. It's that Comey in particular seemed to be a trigger for it. And I find that interesting. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we've got a lot of people who think we're Trump deranged lunatics, but who also happen to be big on the rule of law. I
don't know. I mean, look, if you think we're Trump deranged lunatics, that's fair. You are totally entitled to your interpretation. I'm not going to argue with it. I would say you book your flight down to Florida this spring break and you preserve the U.S. Customs pre-clearance, because we're going to pass. And on that note,
I hear Mexico is wonderful in March.
Mexico is wonderful this time of year. Well, that time of year. Anyway, on that note, like and subscribe. We are going to finish up with something that we know will be a crowd pleaser, and that was where we think that Mark Carney's kind of screwing the pooch. So follow us after the break.
This episode of the Line Podcast is also brought to you by the Daily Bread Food Bank. Imagine choosing between food, rent, or medicine. For the 1.5 million Canadians with disabilities living in poverty, that is the daily reality. The Canada Disability Benefit was created to help, but at less than $7 a day, it isn't enough. Daily Bread Food Bank and coalition partners are urging government to fully fund the benefit. Visit fundthebenefit.ca to take action. Together, we can ensure every Canadian with a disability has the dignity of food and security.
We are back, Matt. We're back on your favorite subject. Let's gin up the hate. Let's gin up the outrage.
So
I at the front top of this podcast explained that I think this move by Sean Fraser, which I presume was condoned by Mark Carney because it would seem bizarre for it not to be, this sort of reflexive anti-S33, we're just going to fly right into a constitutional crisis for funsies, is probably Carney's biggest political and policy fuck up to date. There is no reason for doing it. It will only decapitate any other agenda. It will eat up his life, and it's going to piss people off because he's reflexively parroting the beliefs of his intellectual milieu without actually challenging going to first principles and understanding why those systems are there and what led us to the current moment.
Well, first of all, I'm going to defend the honor of Andrew Coyne here by just saying, for a guy who was snarking the elitist, you just casually referenced S33. And you didn't even, it just popped out of your mouth. You didn't even realize it.
I own my status, man. I may not come from the Laurentian, I may not be of the Laurentian elite, but I've been in it.
You orbit
I understand. I'm not of it. I am in it. It's fine.
S33 of the Constitution, Section 33, also known as the Notwithstanding Clause. See, I can sound like the Globe and Mail too. No, so what was interesting this week, and just to break the fourth wall a little bit, at a conference call that Jen and I had with some of our other colleagues at the Line on Monday, we had like an actual agenda, but basically I killed half the call going, I get to talk about guns this week. Like I was so excited because the
rest of us just went, no.
Yeah, I know. But it had just been leaked to me, the substance of what was going to be announced the next day. And I was like, I get to talk about guns. So look, we all have our priors, we all have our biases, we all have our hobby horses, right? One of the things I think interesting this week is I've been talking to different people who are all reasonable, seasoned, informed observers. And one of the things I've heard on multiple fronts this week is Carney just fucked up big time. But what's interesting is that they're all talking about someone else. Mm-hmm. You are saying that the Constitution thing, S33, is the biggest mistake he's made so far. I have someone else telling me this week that it's guns, and that's probably the one I'm the most excited about because as people who read my column on Tuesday know, it's a terrible friggin' idea. Another one that has come up is the government signaled this week that it's preserving C-18, the Online News Act. One getting a ton of attention has been the Palestine recognition. I just find this fascinating, right? Because one of the thoughts I had, and I'm just going to zoom out. I'm not going to try and rank these. I don't even know if all of them are disasters, right? Like these are smart, non-hysterical people who have all this week decided independently Carney has fucked up bigly. So I want to throw an idea at you.
Okay.
Is the Carney government hitting landmines surprisingly early in a term? Because Trudeau basically had almost his entire of his first majority term.
Right. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, you still do have a lot of Trudeau people. We mentioned this last week. Carney hasn't exactly cleaned house of staff and talent. He hasn't brought in a lot of new blood. And so you have a kind of intellectual group mind that is defaulting to what's lazy and what's easy and what's ordinary and unexamined for them, especially on files that Carney himself doesn't give a shit about. I think Carney doesn't give a shit about guns, frankly. I think Carney doesn't give a shit about C-18 or the News Media Act. I think Carney actually probably doesn't give a shit about S-33. So areas where he is not personally involved and get delegated to other people in the team without
to the liberal
oversight,
hive mind.
It's the liberal hive mind, and you get liberal hive mind policies and liberal hive mind. The liberal hive mind is not nearly as smart as it thinks it is. So you wind up in these fuck ups. The second thing I think we're running into, so this could be just indication of too little appropriate delegation. So he just doesn't have enough people of really high caliber around him that he can delegate stuff to. So my guess is that he's probably hyper fixating on the stuff that really, really matters to him.
Yeah.
And he's letting the liberal hive mind basically take over on the files that don't matter to him. And those are the files that are getting fucked up. And then the other thing I would just say is this is where I think his innate political inexperience starts to come to the forefront. Right? Like not knowing that Section 33 was going to piss off one of his biggest allies in the provincial side, Doug Ford. That's bad politics, man, because that's stupid politics. You should have been able to foresee that. In fact, before you even forwarded something like that, the person you should have had on the phone was Doug Ford or a couple of provincial premiers to basically hash it out.
You needed to have a Zoom with Legault and Ford before you set Fraser loose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's I just read that as political naivete. That's rookie politics right there.
The other one we haven't even mentioned yet, and video viewers would have seen a minute ago, Jen, don't worry. It wasn't that I wasn't paying attention to you, but video viewers would have seen about 60 seconds ago. I picked up my phone and I looked because I wanted to make sure this hasn't changed. We're recording this in the afternoon on September 26th, 2025. And Canada Post has walked off the job. And, obviously there's been labor disputes unfolding with Canada Post and the Crown and the union. Words are hard today. There have been ongoing labor disputes for the last couple of years between the Crown Corporation and QB or CUPW, whatever it is, Canada Union of Postal Workers. But government announced yesterday that it is planning to proceed with massive reforms to Canada Post, including the end of home delivery. The minister responsible has said very bluntly, I think it's Minister Lightbound, that Canada Post is fiscally not sustainable and it has to reform. It has to reform immediately. This is a plan that is apparently going to take about a decade to end home delivery, but will be mostly enacted in 2 or 3 years. And the Postal Workers Union walked off the job. And the government seems to have been somewhat surprised by that. So we've got guns, we've got C-18, we've got Palestine, we've got the Constitution, and now we have a postal strike. I don't know how these are going to go out. The government might find a way to get a win on any one of them here. But Carney is taking hits much earlier in the term than Trudeau did. And Jen, I think you've diagnosed it correctly. A rookie prime minister inherited an exhausted government that was full of really terrible ideas. Yep. And the reason I ended my column on Tuesday about guns the way I did, I at my last couple paragraphs, I moved away from guns entirely. I'd said all I needed to say about guns. What I did say is this is a portent of how this guy is going to handle brain dead Trudeau era baggage. And, I don't care how shiny and new the prime minister is. I don't care what color his socks are. If his response to everything outside of economic and fiscal policy and relations with the king are things that he's just going to delegate to the Trudeau leftovers, we're going to get a continuing of Trudeau era dysfunction.
Yeah, there was nothing more special than looking at my feed and finding Minister Guilbeault talking about how, no, we're sticking with C-18, goddammit, because that's working great.
So, someone asked me the other day, when will Liberal... Oh,
sorry,
my God.
That was sound.
Yeah, you were making...
sound with my mouth.
You were making fart noises. I thought it was like feedback.
Noises. No, I'm making mouth fart noises.
Frustrated mouth fart noises.
Yeah,
someone asked me the other day, when will Liberals admit maybe this isn't going well? And I snarkily replied, when Chrystia Freeland posts a letter on Twitter.
It's pretty good.
But look, I'm not saying this government's non-recoverable, and I remind our listeners once again that Carney has one more month of my 6-month grace period. But
again, we're very sure that the Prime Minister's office has got that day marked in highlight. They're like, Matt Gurney will be angry at us after today. This is it for us. This is the cliff.
I know some of them well enough to know that they've got twisted sense of humor, and they probably just did go add a calendar alert for that day.
Well, there you go.
But no, all kidding aside, you and I started our 100-day clocks on Carney at different times.
Yeah.
You were more graceful than I was. You were more generous.
In many ways. Like, not even that, just fine.
What I would say for your timeline, because you started your 100-day timeline, I think, a couple of weeks ago after Labor Day.
Mm-hmm.
If Carney is fighting on the gun front, the Constitution front, the postal workers, the very angry Jewish organizations in Canada right now, plus the tattered remnants of the non-subsidized Canadian media, because we're dropping like flies these days. More and more of our once proudly unsubsidized fellow orgs are now taking the Google loot. Carney's going to find himself having a fuck of a time when Jen's 100-day timeline rolls around, because all of his energy and political capital is going to be frittered away on this bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I would say. Every single one of these fuck-ups, and I agree that they're fuck-ups, is non-mission critical, with the exception of one, and that is a constitutional crisis.
The non-mission critical stuff can kill you.
Well, no, it can, and it will add up. But if Sean Fraser basically careens us into the side of a mountain of a constitutional crisis for no reason, that will completely derail Carney's entire term. So Carney should probably put a lid on that. But the rest of this stuff, like, did I really expect a Carney government to make any smart moves on guns? Not really, because he doesn't give a shit. Did I really expect C-18 to be repealed? Not really, because I don't think he gives a shit, and Pride and maintaining their own internal coalition was going to keep that together. Wasn't really expecting Carney to walk back some of the brain dead other stuff. The stuff that's mission critical is the stuff where he's ultimately going to get graded on.
Can I ask you this then? What do you think is mission critical for Carney?
Mission critical is going to be economic development and growth, diversification, rebuilding alliances, and for lack of a better term, and I would say this very vaguely, managing the Americans in the broadest sense. Mm-hmm. Like I said, you could make the argument that, Hoekstra aside, the last couple of months have been very positive for Carney on the American file. The Americans, and especially Trump, have kind of forgotten we existed. That's good. That's great for us.
Yeah.
We've kind of gone elbows down, but we haven't really been smacked in the face. So if we can continue that, even, steady, smile politely, not like this, but more like this. Mm-hmm. And we have to put up with a couple of Hoekstra comments that are stupid and base. That's not a bad outcome for us. We're managing the Americans fine. I think we are also heading into the moment of an acceleration cycle in the Americans, in the sense that increasingly the White House is going to be OODA looping through its own drama. So again, that's great for us. If they manage to waste all of their time and political capital on their own bullshit, as dark as that bullshit gets, we just keep it over there, Lord, keep it over there, and that's a good outcome for us. So look, if I see some progress on mission critical, that's good. It's not to say that I love the screw-ups. I don't love the screw-ups, but none of these are screw-ups that I wouldn't have expected.
I don't think any of that analysis is wrong, but I am going to say governments have a way of getting eaten, not by the big screw-up, but by the nine small ones.
By the 9 small. I think that's right. So, it remains to be seen, classic pundit phrase. Time will tell. Time will tell. Yeah, time will tell where any of this goes. I think there's a very good possibility that nobody mentions S-33 again. I think there's a good possibility that the guns file will continue to be messy, but that's not going to lose them any votes. I think there's a pretty good possibility that they're going to hold fast to their bad media policies. So, status quo, fine, things will continue to be shit. But the economy might improve, and we might get something a little bit more productive coming out of the Americans. And maybe they just forget that we exist as they face forward into the darkness. And we just get to stay back and be like, okay, cool, we'll just take your political refugees and maybe the people who get booted as a result of your weird finagling with the H-1B visas. I really wish we would be. I wish Carney was more aggressive about some of that stuff. By the way, but that's another. That's it. We'll readdress that conversation in another 75 or so days.
The what I would add, and we can just glance at the clock here. Yeah, you got to go get your kids. Let me add this, but I'll add it briefly. One of the things we were talking about in the first segment, and I think you made the point really well, was that Canadian technocratic elites are tone deaf and stupid. They're very, very smart and highly educated, but they're
very,
also
very
dumb
smart,
as hammers.
highly educated, but they're also dumb as hammers. Yes.
One of the things that we're going to have to watch out for is everything you just said about the Americans not paying attention to us for a couple months. I think that's largely true. You want to know when Canada did pop up on American network TV, particularly right-leaning American network TV?
Oh, no.
It was when that country singer dude kept getting blocked from singing in parks.
It's stuff like that we got to watch for.
Mm-hmm. Because Carney and the ambassadors and the shining lights at Global Affairs Canada can be doing a bang-up job keeping us off the radar. But then some moronic city councilor in some suburb of 40,000 people denies a park permit for an event for some guy who goes on Fox News and says he's been silenced by Canada. And the next thing you know, we've got tariffs coming in. Yeah. So I think I said before in the first segment, like you were talking about the economists and the carbon tax letter. The first default assumption of every public relations campaign is do no harm. Before you go out and try to make your problem better, make sure what you're about to do is not going to make your problem worse. Make sure at the very least you're starting at zero, and then you can only do better from there. Canadian technocratic elites have not even figured out the do no self-harm principle of how to approach this.
On that note, I think we got nothing else to say for once, and I got to go pick up my kids. And I'm sorry for coining the phrase technocratic elites. We're going to probably come back to that one again and again.
The bad one you did was when you called Carney technocrat daddy.
Yeah, but that one was dirty and fun.
Yeah, it's so much fun having that as part of my ongoing memory. I remember asking my brain that day, put that one in the short-term memory buffer and then and then I'll go make a sandwich and then it will be gone. But no, it went right to the core.
I'm not even apologizing.
I know you're not.
All right. Well,
like and subscribe.
Check us out at www.readtheline. The Democratic Daddy will come for you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.